one of the hardest runs I've ever done. We were going for a 10-mile run. We didn't talk the whole way because we were in a bad mood with each other. And then we suddenly got an argument of who was faster or who had the better kick. And because I was getting pretty cocky at that stage, and he says, all right, you want to go? Then I said, all right. And he says, well, get going. And if you go, I'll outkick you. And then half a mile from home, I just took off, and he just sat on me the whole way. We probably ran like a 155 along the river. And he just blew my doors off me the last 50 meters into the house and goes, woo!
What's up, team, and welcome to another episode of the Run Healthy podcast presented by Recover Athletics. My dad always talks about the glory days of his high school running career. At 16, he ran his best race ever, a 10:10 2-mile. This is a classic sports story. Peak early, never see the mountaintop again. This story is the exact opposite of what's going on with Nick Willis's career. Nick won his first Olympic medal at 25, his second at 33, and now at 37 years old, he's still a favorite every time he toes the line in the mile or 1500. In fact, he's in the middle of the healthiest streak of his running career when most of his competitors have hung up their spikes. Nick has battled every injury you can think of, but 19 years in a row, he's broken 4 minutes in the mile. He'll chalk a lot of it up to luck, but on today's show, we talk about the bold choices he consistently makes that contribute to his impressive longevity. I sat down with Nick and his training partner, James Randon, for a conversation over Zoom. Well, Nick, I'd love to dive into a little bit about your running. So you're 37 years old. You're the veteran of the 1500 meter mile field, and nothing happens by accident, right? It's clear that athletes who stand out in terms of longevity at some point in time decide to make that a central goal. And from what I've read, you weren't always calibrated this way. You had some injury problems in college and like a kind of string of surgeries when you immediately turned pro. Was there like a moment when you realized that running for a season and then running for a career were two different animals?
I wish it was that clear cut in my career, but and it wasn't sort of an immediate thing that I matured later on. There's actually been sort of periods of health and periods of injury, sort of up and down flow throughout my career. But I would actually say the last 2.5 years have perhaps been the most healthy I've ever been. So maybe that time finally happened when the maturity came around, when it was largely irrelevant when I'm 35 years old, right, to 37. But I feel like I have learned a lot. Health has an element of luck involved in it, and I certainly have, I would say, although I have been through a lot of surgeries, I've had a number of stress fractures, I've had a number of muscle pulls. Where I would say that I'm lucky is that none of those issues have been the chronic type of injuries, the Achilles tendonitis, the hamstring strains that just nag and nag and nag on, and people are like, or the plantar fasciitis sort of stuff. Do you train through it, or do you take time off that uncertainty and you just develop it into a chronic level and it just nags and it just makes you hate life and hate the sport? All of my injuries have been pretty much like, all right, I can't run, I got to get surgery, I've got to take 3 months off to heal the bone, and there's a definitive timeline on it. There's light at the end of the tunnel. There's a set protocol with how one sort of comes out of that. And so it's enabled me to have a break emotionally from the sport and then slowly build back into it. So I think I've been very fortunate in that regard.
Have those crises, as much as a crisis can go, like according to plan? Like James, your big stress fracture, you did the whole protocol, you tried for the comeback, and then there was like a kind of a double setback that came on with that. Nick, have yours all been like by the medical textbook, or have there been some that are worse than others?
I think pretty much I've recovered from the specific injury as the protocols or the timelines have been said. Sometimes I might take it a little bit more cautiously than what is designated, because I'm like, well, I've already sort of thrown this particular season out of the way, so what's the rush sort of thing. The one time that I could almost say that it was a mistake, but it ended up resolving itself over the length of my career, is that when I had my major hip surgery, I had a labral tear and FAI impingement, which involved a pretty significant surgery, and I was out for 4 months. When I returned running, like my first week back running, I had like my IT band flared up again. What I thought was my IT band turned out I'd had a meniscus tear in my knee the whole time. So I should have had that taken care of at the same time as so I ran for like another 6 or 7 months after my hip surgery. And then once I got back to full training, I had to have my knee operated on. So had I sort of really been focusing on the bigger holistic picture, not just the specific injury that was stopping me from running, but look at all of the different potential issues, we might have been able to spot that and gotten it taken care of while I was already out of commission.
And did you have the long view this whole time? Was it like, I'm doing this sport, I'm going to be on like in the elite field at each one of these championships, just keeping going? Or some of these, like, did some of these push you to the brink of considering hanging it up?
There was one specific injury. It wasn't that it made me think I wanted to hang it up. It's that I thought I might have no choice. And that was 2010. I had my hip go out. I was lining up a putt on like the 4th hole at Wainui Golf Club in my hometown in New Zealand. And I'd already been for a long run in the morning, so I'd pretty fatigued. And when I was squatting down, I came out of that squat and suddenly my hip was locked up. Now, this is something I've experienced maybe for 6 or 7 years prior to, but normally all I need to do is do a little like adductor stretch or do a quick little sprint and it pops back into place. But this, it never came out of it. And I tried to do rehab for a couple of months. My doctor's like, surgery's last option. But every day it just got worse and worse, to the point where when I was walking to the gate at the airport to fly to go get my surgery, I couldn't walk more than about 30 meters without significant pain. So I thought, this is probably it for me. The surgery is the last hope. But I'd already won a medal before, so it wasn't like the end of the world. If that, it would have been sad, but and then turned out that once I came out of that surgery, not everybody does, I was able to slowly get back to being even better than I'd ever been before. So yeah, that was probably the most challenging time. Normally, I think. Sorry, what was that, James?
Yeah, no, that's pretty tough. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about coming back from that injury, because you said you've had these bigger, more concrete timelines for recovering. But I actually found when I come back from big injuries, you get all these annoying nagging ones. Well, not necessarily nagging, but just like basic running injuries, like shin splints, for example. And like, how do you mitigate those smaller ones as you return from these big ones? Like knowing that you have the muscle memory, but.
Generally, I've always been super cautious coming back from injuries because I've already had to take a good 3 or 4 months off. I'm like, the worst thing I can do is like get back into a hole. Like, I would much rather take 10 small steps forward than take 5 big steps and then lose another 2 weeks. Like, I don't think I could emotionally deal with that. It's almost self-preservation emotionally. I'd rather make little incremental progressive improvements rather than risk that setback. And so the thing my PT and close friend Pete Kiddo had always instilled in me when he came up with this protocol was like, it's normally about a 6-week program where the first week, every day you're doing 60 minutes of walking. Well, like, not every day, like 4 or 5 times a week. So you get 60 minutes of exercise, but the first day is like all walking.
Yeah.
But then after 4 days, every 6 minutes, you'll jog for 30 seconds of that. So you're 10 times 60. You got 10 6-minute segments within that. And for 30 seconds of that 6-minute segment, you'll jog. And then 4 days later, you jog for a minute of those 6-minute segments and so forth. And so by the time you get up to the 6 weeks, you're basically back to regular running again. And the human body's pretty amazing at, regardless of whatever biomechanical issues people have, by and large, there's some exceptions to the rule, but I think the human body will find its equilibrium and find its balances and can handle some pretty amazing training loads so long as you give it gradual exposure to those strains and stresses. And that's really the number one reason why people come up with injuries. I'm not saying it's the only reason, but it's by far and away the number one, is they jump into something that their body isn't quite ready to make that adjustment for. So it's, you got to dip your toes into that new stress zone rather than go on the deep end right away.
So
Totally.
You're taking 6 weeks to get up to about on the order of like 30 to 40 miles a week. which is
basically.
categorically different from what most people do to recover from an injury. I feel like yeah.
And I'm still cross training in addition to that and spending a lot of time in the weight room. But in terms of like specific putting running shoes on and being outside and feel like you're like on a running protocol, yeah. But that's because I'm coming out of 3 months completely off. It doesn't seem like that hard. All right, like it actually feels pretty cool to be actually out there and doing it.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like one thing which I think is super cool is the research on walking as like an effective retraining tool for running is like getting more and more robust. The loading in the lower leg when you're like on a walking program is like pretty much non-existent compared to when you're running, but loading at the hip and knee is still super significant. So when people are coming back from those injuries, they're like, "Oh, I want to really run," and it's like, well, walking, you're actually only like you're almost all the way there in terms of pressure.
And I'll do that for a lot of my rehab time anyway when I'm not allowed to run. But I think it's nice to like start your watch and feel like you're out there for the 60 minutes. Emotionally, you're out there training again. That's a huge component as well. And that prevents you from rushing into it. Whereas if you're given 30 minutes to run and you hammer for 30 minutes, you want to get the most out of that little window. But when you know you're out there for a whole 60-minute window, like there isn't that same tendency or temptation to rush into it. I think being in the professional world versus being in college or high school is a lot, from my perspective at least, that in the situations I've had with my sponsors that I've always been taken really well care of and not at risk of reductions, is that I've always thought of it as Olympic cycles. Like, all right, Olympics are 2.5 years away. I don't have to rush this. And it's not about getting ready for the next indoor season or next outdoor or next cross country, whatever you have, your conference meets that college kids will experience. And so that's taken away that pressure. But I will say this, like for all of the people that I've trained with over the years, I've probably trained with 150 people in different phases throughout my career. I've been doing it for a long time. The talented people who have been stuck in that perpetual injury cycle, they're often the ones like that they haven't yet qualified for a championship or haven't quite made that such and such a team. And so they're always like, I can't afford to go through the whole protocol. Let's like skip that and go to this. But then end up missing it anyway because another injury comes up and they never do. I find that by going through the proper phases first and then picking your racing schedule after you're back to 99%, I end up coming back quicker than I would have anyway, because you're never that. I don't want to show up on the start line only 80% ready as it is. So,
yeah, I think that you've shown a lot of patience, but the consistency has been there. In doing research for this, and I listened to your conversation with Mario Fraioli, which I really enjoyed, and talking about your 18 years sub 4 minutes in the mile, which I feel like if track and field were a better marketed sport, has got to be like up there with some of the most interesting like sports streaks. When I was like, all right, let's find some good sports streaks. Gretzky's 13 100-point seasons, Chamberlain's 126 games with 20 points or more. How important is breaking John Walker's 19-year streak? Is that like one of the big goals that you still got going on?
only thing that keeps me going. No. I honestly, I hadn't even thought about it until this season. But what's interesting about it looking back now, and as we talk about this, is like, if you actually dived into the data a little more acutely, you would notice it's not 18 consecutive outdoor seasons or 18 consecutive indoor seasons. It's like the fact that I can run the mile in the indoor season or in the New Zealand Down Under season or in the Northern Hemisphere. As I said, like I've had some major injuries within some of those years. And even if I'm out for 6 months, there's still another 6 months within that calendar year to have some good performances. And that's the beauty of our sport. There's always a race available somewhere. So wait till you're really fit. And then sometimes it's actually fun coming into sneaky fitness at a sort of out of season date when most other people aren't, because it's like, well, you get to beat up on some people who are out of season, and it's a good way to get your ego back after sort of being out of the scene for a little while.
Do people on the start line ever kind of like, oh, Willis is out of shape, I can have one on him, and then it's just like wear him out?
Oh no, I'm sure they do. Like And then there's times when I've showed up at the end of a season when I've just come into it and they're like, oh man, Willis is fresh, when they're like, they just want to have the season finished at the Fifth Avenue Mile. The one that comes to my mind was a couple of years ago. I wasn't required to run it by any stretch of the imagination. They said it was totally up to me, but I wanted to. It was the Adidas Boston Boost Games in Massachusetts when it was at MIT. And I'd only been running for 6 weeks after a stress fracture in my fibula. And so I would sort of followed that protocol. I was on a little bit faster protocol than what I'd explained to you because I'd only been out. It was only a stress reaction, so I wasn't out for 12 weeks. I was only out for 6 weeks. And I got on the start line. I did my warm up and I felt good on the warm up. Everything was going normal. I'd almost forgotten that I'd been out of action. But as we, as we jogged from the call room to the start line, suddenly it dawned on me, I have nothing in my training to give me evidence that I can actually complete this race. Like, what if I suddenly hit the wall with 800 meters to go? Like, I might be able to rig one more lap and I'll like have to pull out at the 1200 meter mark. Like, that's never dawned on me in a race. Like, I'm always going to be able to finish. That's how suddenly dawned on me, like, I actually have no idea how I'm going to do, like, because there's nothing in my training. It was a terrifying prospect, but like, I just chill out. Sam Parsons in the race, this was before he sort of made a name for himself, and I said, just stick on his back like glue and hang in there for as long as you possibly can and don't come last. And I managed to run a 4 flat in the end. So I was actually pretty proud of that. But that was that sort of circumstance of coming back out of an injury time.
Right on. Yeah, one of the races that I think is fascinating, and maybe to jump back to James and I are definitely like huge fans of the golden era of New Zealand's distance running. And one of the resources that I found a couple of years ago that I love is newzealandonscreen.com, which is like all the old running documentaries, which I think are like the best in the world. And one of them that I really liked was What Happens When You've Run to the Top, which is where John Walker goes to visit Peter Snell at Snell's lab in California. And they like do tests on him. And then they sit there and talk about triumphs and tribulations in running. And it's just sort of like a candid conversation. And that race, the one that you just mentioned, may have not been necessarily a high point, although a victory in its own right, but your fastest ever mile, the sub 350. And in that conversation, Snell and Walker's sort of like bemoaning. He's like, there was this anticlimax. There was like this kind of complex emotion that resulted after I broke that world record. And I wonder, can you take us through your sub 350 and talk about maybe the emotions that followed?
Well, what was sort of crazy about my sub 350 is it was probably one of the worst ever nights for our child getting up like 17 times that night. It was one of his worst ever sleeps. He would have been 11 months old. We were in Oslo, which only gets like 1 hour of darkness in the middle of summertime, right, in Scandinavia. And he just couldn't sleep in the apartment that we were renting right by Bislett Stadium. And so my wife wants to normally do all of the work on a race night, especially, but she just couldn't. Like, she was, and Nick, you got to help it. I said, absolutely. And so like we somewhat had ridden that race off, but they went out so crazy fast. I think they ran a 53 or something for the first 409 meters. And I was in dead last or second to last way back. If you watch the race, it's like there are 2 different heats, two different packs, and the front pack all ties up and the back pack catches up with 500 to go. And me and a couple other guys, we swarm around the whole field and suddenly find ourselves in the top 3 or 4 runners, and only Suleiman, the guy who ended up winning, held off. But I wasn't really thinking about the time at all. I was just trying to like save face because I was in dead last for most of the race. Then suddenly with 200 to go, I looked at the clock and I realized I only had to run a 28 flat to break 350. So suddenly, and that gave me that extra adrenaline rush that carries you to PRs. You know, it's like it gets you through that extra bit that in training you're never able to dig that deep. And I thought that was an amazing experience. I didn't get the oh now what moment because of what I had been through with my child and my wife, and so we got to celebrate that together. And As soon as the race was over, we walked back to our apartment. We rented an Airbnb like 100 meters away from the stadium, and it was just a real intimate time with the family walking, and it's like bright out at 11 o'clock at night in Scandinavia. So we went down to the park, pushed our son on the swings, and just talked through what a crazy ride it had been that year.
Hold on. What's up with this interruption? We'll be right back with Nick Willis. But first, do you want to run more, hurt less, and recover faster? Of course you do. If you're listening to an interview with Nick Willis, you're probably pretty serious about running. In order to make the most of every training week, prehab, resistance training, and recovery have to be a part of your strategy. For help with that, check out the Recover Athletics app in the Apple App Store. Solve nagging pain, prevent injury, and run your best with Recover Athletics. And now, back to the show. Yeah, I heard Usain Bolt ate some chicken nuggets, then took a long nap, then woke up and ran the 9:58 or whatever. So this is a similar story, I guess.
Well, and I didn't have coffee either.
That's right. You don't drink coffee. You don't drink coffee at all, though, right?
I didn't used to. I've started a job now, so that might.
Oh, this is very recent because back in January, you told me that you never do it.
I've had like 5 cups of coffee in my life now, and I've all been within the last 12 months. So I'll pick and choose my moment.
Honestly, that could be a one of those like bizarre world records, fastest coffee-free mile. I don't know. I just feel
I think whatever science is out there claiming the benefits of caffeine, like my sample size of 1 refute to that is that, hey, I've run 3:29 and I honestly don't think I could have gotten any ounce out of myself. And if you look at the race, like technically there was a chance that in theory could have been worth a 3:28 high and the perfect line without having to run wide and all that sort of junk. And that was without caffeine. So that proves that you don't have to have caffeine to get them out of yourself.
You can get to 3:28 without caffeine is what you're saying.
I think it's possible, but I think people who are reliant on caffeine might need it to get them back up to the normal level. But if you've never been one to have that dependency, then it isn't necessary. That's my theory anyway. But again, sample size of 1.
I try to go off caffeine for 10 days a few times a year. And it's always pretty tough.
The coffee taper is a big thing amongst the sort of like amateur distance crowd in Boston. Like taper.
I don't recommend that. Yeah, I just mean in general, but not towards races. But anyway.
What's the half-life? No, I'm keeping this going. What's the half-life on caffeine? Is it like 6 hours?
It's about 8
like 6 or 8.
Yeah.
So I had one the other day because I had a long work day and I couldn't afford to take a nap at all because of training and stuff. And I was still I was charging at 10 p.m. at night.
I think
I went way beyond the full life of what is normally expected just on 1 cup of coffee at 7 a.m. Like, cause I never do them. I was like washing dishes at 10 p.m. at night. And my wife's like, what's going on?
Yeah. Well, I think that it's psychoactive all the way up down into like 5 milligrams. So if you have 100 milligram cup of coffee, the half-life on that, it's going to take quite a few cycles for it to get all the way down to where you're not actually feeling the effect.
All right, we can end that now.
No more.
Well, so yeah, I actually brings me to the point I wanted to go down, which is I feel like you've definitely come across as the thinking man's miler. You definitely seem to be more, I think, thoughtful and reflective on your seasons and your training than I feel like other athletes tend to be. So, do you think that like that approach of like thinking through your seasons and your training and really reflecting on what you've done has like helped you through your career? I know that like, at least for myself, I definitely have struggled with knowing when am I overthinking? And that's, I think, also a common trope in running where people can overthink their training and actually end up causing more issues than they solve by, thinking about what they should and shouldn't be doing.
I'll initially answer that with a story. What year was it? Maybe 2014. It was 2014, well, February of 2014, right before I sort of made that next jump through in my performances. And I sent out some messages to Steve Cram, to Steve Ovett, and a couple other New Zealanders, people that I really respected in the running world. And I said, hey, can we have a chat on Skype? I feel like I'm in this rut and I can't sort of quite get out of it. And then Steve Ovett got on. He was the first to talk to me. He goes, "What's this all about, Willis? You're overthinking about it too much. Stop thinking and just race." So like, I was like, "All right, you're right." So I definitely think there's been a lot that's helped me in my training. Having more of an involved approach to having a seat at the table with my coaches, and to be thoughtful, and to make sure that I'm putting everything in context of the big picture of both my ultimate goals, but also in my daily life, and finding a balance with other stuff going on that sometimes coaches don't have the ability to do. They I think can work really well if we're a sort of a robot with no other variables input into our days, and you can create that if you create a really regimented training group or whatever, but that's not who I am. But then it has potentially impacted me sometimes on the race front, where I become fairly one-dimensional with what I'm able to execute in a race, and sometimes it works out if the race falls into my lap, but other times then I'm just limited with what I can do because of my timidness, perhaps. Rio, I was very, very fortunate that because the race was so slow, it was like 2:17 through the 800. It like removed my normal cautious approach. I hate running more than 1,500 meters. I want to run the least possible distance in the race, but when it's that slow, it doesn't matter if you're stuck out in lane 2 and 3. So I was almost smiling, thinking, good, now I can sort of be carefree and do whatever everyone always tells me to do, get up into position. And I'm like, it sounds a lot easier than it is to be done, because you can always do that, but then it will cost you later on in the race, and I knew it wouldn't cost me. So it was fun to have that sort of opportunity.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like in racing and also in training, you've kind of, at least through various interviews, definitely shown that you're willing to modify or go away from what is traditionally thought of being like the well-trodden path to success. Like I read that you try to not hit the track hard for the anaerobic super fast stuff more than once every like 2 weeks. And I wonder how that process kind of developed, how you learned to know where that limit was, and then how you maybe battled through the complexity of like, well, all these other fast guys are doing this way. How am I going to beat them if I'm doing it this way?
I think there's two parts to it. I came into Michigan with a pretty solid foundational belief in what successful running training looks like before I even got to college. And that's coming from the great traditions of New Zealand milers and all of the great books that have been written. And I know you guys have read some of them. That was really firmly planted in my mind, that the foundation of your week is a long run, that you don't try and cross that line too many times. You've got to get a really good solid base before you're willing to start doing any of the anaerobic sort of stuff. So when I came into Ann Arbor, I was willing to stand firm in those beliefs and say no when certain training expectations were laid out there. And I think I slowly influenced how things would look with that training program. And I would give a lot of credit to my coach Ron for having the humility to listen, and not just to me, but to other athletes he's had since then, especially Will Lear, when he finally came into our group, brought knowledge from both Mark Rowland and Gags from New York, New Jersey Track Club. So Ron's sort of implemented a lot of the stuff that he's learned from both of us. But I'm sort of going full circle. I almost forgotten what I was talking about. So I had a really firm belief in why I was going to train that way. What was the question again?
Oh, it's just sort of about like tuning out like the traditional approach, maybe like the NCAA training.
And hard intervals, running hard intervals often.
Yeah, and then I think that that's where I was going. And then also I just was my freshman year, I just felt really burnt out after I've never like had to do cross country indoor outdoor. Like normally it's just one track season and one cross country season. And after indoors I was so burnt out. I was like, Ron, I can't handle this. I got to have a break. Like, just give me 5 weeks. Let me just go run. I'll run hard every day, but I don't want to do any workouts with the team. And then but I promise I'll come down and do strides. So every other day or every third day, I'd jump on the track after doing a hard 10 or 11 miler by myself or one other guy. And then I'd do strides with like the sprinters on the team, the 400, 600 guys. And at the end of those 5 weeks was the Penn relays. And I lined up and somehow, the week before Penn relays, and I ran a 1,500 meters at like a local meet at Eastern Michigan University, and we went through in 2:10 through the 800, and then someone picked it up a little bit and we were 3:10 through the 12. And then I thought I better take off now, and I ran a 36 flat for the last 300. And I hit my regional qualifying time 3:46, and I was a freshman. I was shocked, like, where did that come from? I never had that sort of speed before. And then the next week at Penn relays, I ended up, they went out crazy fast. The Arkansas team had Dan Lincoln. He was a famous steeplechaser for the US. He did the leadoff leg in the 1200 and he went out in 55, then 152, and everyone was still there. And I was hanging on. And then suddenly I thought, I guess I better start kicking now. And I didn't know where it came from, but boom, I had these turbo jets, the last 150, and I ran a 2:49 flat for the 1200, and which is still happens to be the lead-off record at Penn relays. And I hadn't done any workouts for 5 weeks, but I'd been running hard every day and doing strides every other day or every third day. So basically from that point on, I was like, I'd be foolish not to continue implementing what I call a mongrel march training. It's where you just go mongrel. You just run hard every day and you don't have any structure, and put in solid strides. And so that's sort of been another cornerstone of training that I've always implemented. And it's sample size of one, but it's always worked for me. And it'd be foolish to go away from that, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think you tell the story with a lot of humility, but that's a pretty badass thing to do. You're an 18-year-old kid, and then you've got this legendary coach, and you're
I was 19.
19. Okay.
I came into school a year later.
Got it. So I take that back about it being badass, but like that, like the idea of being like pushing back that hard against a famous coach and then still continuing and working with him. Does that come entirely from like the New Zealand tradition of like the 100-mile week and then like some sharpening stuff and then you go race? Or where do you think that like conviction came from?
Probably the fact that, there's a couple of facts, and the first one would be that my older brother is 8 years older than me, very accomplished runner in his own right. He was a D2 1,500 meter and indoor mile champion, sub 4 minute miler, 148 guy. He was always telling me how I should train, right? And what do younger brothers do to older brothers?
Listen.
They don't listen. We stand
That's
up.
An older brother. That's an older brother's comment. Absolute swing and a miss.
Younger brothers will always say, stop telling me what to do. No, I'm going to do it my own way. Doesn't mean we're not listening, but we're not going to verbalize that we're listening, right? And so this is a very accomplished person trying to tell me what to do. When I just finished high school, I waited a year and a half after finishing high school before coming to college. So he was very involved in those 18 months. But we fought every single day over everything, including running training. One of the hardest runs I've ever done, we were going for a 10-mile run. We didn't talk the whole way because we were in a bad mood with each other. And then we suddenly got an argument of who was faster or who had the better kick. And because I was getting pretty cocky at that stage, and he says, all right, you want to go? Then I said, all right. And he says, well, get going. And if you go, I'll outkick you. And then half a mile from home, I just took off, and he just sat on me the whole way. We probably ran like a 155 along the river. And he just blew my doors off me the last 50 meters into the house and goes, woo! Anyway, I digress, but I think standing up to my brother and having my own strong beliefs meant that I probably had a little bit more confidence on how to approach those conversations when it came to talking with my coach, Ron, at Michigan. But again, it's the willingness of my coach. He wasn't just, he will say he was begrudgingly allowing me to, but I think deep down, and he probably told all of the team that I was just Willis, and no one else is allowed to do that. And he doesn't agree with anything I'm doing, but he doesn't want me to go back to New Zealand, sort of thing. But I think deep down, I gave him good reasoning, like there was rationale behind it, and I was able to articulate with running theory why I was going to do that. So and it worked out. So we've built up a lot of trust in each other.
Totally. Well, I think maybe to pivot the conversation away from just like the nitty gritty of running training stuff. So James, and maybe you're the better one to ask this question, but James has mentioned that you've got some pretty cool thoughts about how to grow track and field, specifically racing the mile in the US. And now you've got this new role at Tracksmith. Can you give us some behind the scenes as to where you want to take the sport in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I've had a bunch of ideas that I'm really keen to dive into, but I've realized that it's actually for me to properly execute something that's actually going to be successful. I'm learning in the last 6 weeks, especially now in this role at Tracksmith. I've got a lot of learning to do as well, and so ideas are one thing, but being able to execute and get the right team behind. So I'm really soaking up everything I can at the moment at Tracksmith. I got an amazing group of creative people, and they probably the best in the business at storytelling and sort of doing the community side of things with the sport. So I think that will be really integral. My wife and I put on a meet by chance, really. I needed a race. I'd been injured. Our son had just been born. I couldn't travel before the World Championships in 2013. So we asked a bunch of people if they wanted to run a mile at a high school near our home in Ann Arbor. And without really planning anything, we had 2,500 people show up. Like, wait, what's going on here? And so we sort of thought through, like, why are the factors? Why is there such a big crowd? And so the next year we put on a formalized meet, and we charged a gate fee, and we got about 3,500 people. We had 2 races, a men's mile and a women's 800. And I think a couple of factors there. One, probably the biggest factor, was that it was late August or mid-August, late August. I think too often track meets try to take place in the spring in the US. And the problem with doing things, in my opinion, in the spring is that your main foundational fan base, which are all of the high school athletes and their families, is hundreds of thousands of high school track and field athletes in the country and cross-country runners, the second most participated sport, I believe, behind football. But what's happening in the spring for them, they've got graduation, they've got their own track meets, they've got so much going on. They don't have time to come along to a track meet. It's only the real diehards that can. So you miss out on all of that base. But in August, most people finish their summer holidays. Most people have returned home from their cabins or their lake houses or their summer camps and all that sort of stuff, their trips out west. The team has been training all summer, but they want to have some team morale, some team building exercises before they head off to their cross-country camp or before their cross-country season starts. And so we just, by chance, lucked into that perfect storm. Probably every single cross-country team within a 50-minute radius of where we live, and there's up to 3 million people on that side of Metro Detroit from where we live. Most of those cross-country kids came out as a team to watch our meet. That was really the foundation of having that crowd. So I think there's something there, and I think many other of these sort of boutique mile exhibition events have popped up around the country since then, have found that same recipe for success as well. And I think it can be replicated in really good ways all over the country. And I think that's one of the opportunities. And I think there's ways to grow it beyond just being boutique, but that's going to be the challenge, is taking it to that next level of scale, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that Americans were particularly well suited for finding the mile interesting. Everybody's forced to run it in public school PE. I remember it as a pretty traumatizing experience, but everybody knows 4 minutes. Okay. You're basically a pro. 5 minutes, you're making the high school team, and people can kind of conceptualize on that. And also it's a perfect race. It's quick. You can run a bunch of them, and there's drama guaranteed. And
the crowd came for 1 hour, and the whole hour was focused on about 20 people, the men's and the women's races. We got to fully introduce every athlete. And after the races, every single athlete got hounded by the crowd, and they got to have a personal connection to those athletes. I think one of the beauties of our sport is that we have such diversity in disciplines, and it's like a festival of every different type of athletic pursuit, whether it be the javelin or the pole vault or the sprints or the shot put or the distance running, right? And that works on a scale of the Olympics or maybe a Diamond League, but I think it's much harder to do that on a smaller scale very well. If you got limited resources, I think it's a much better proposition to funnel those resources and prioritize them into one focal point. Don't try and appeal to everybody, just appeal to your particular event group, whether it be distance or jumps or throws or sprints, and make a real community feel around that. And so I think I would like to see more opportunities to pull my event, the mile, outside of the bubble that is the IAAF or World Athletics. Not exclusively, but I think there are ways to do that in a way that would benefit both the athlete and the fans. And when you watch a track meet on TV, like, the diehards watch every single event.
Right.
But the rest of people, they will tune in for their 2 or 3 races they really like, but they're not really caring about the other 70%. So why not actually find ways to focus on what they're interested in and really highlight that and package it and present it in a way that really does quality over quantity.
Totally. James mentioned to me once, I thought this was like, when I was first getting into running, I was like, this is the best idea ever. Halftime of a major sporting event, run a mile. People love watching people race. Like, it would be exhilarating, like the halftime of an MLS game. Like, you've got people from all around the world anyway attending those types of events. Like, throw a mile in at halftime. Like, that's way better than beer break.
In cricket, they have an hour lunch break between the 2 innings in the traditional, what they call a one-day cricket match, 50 over one-day international. And some event promoters in New Zealand did that. So at the 5 New Zealand versus Australia cricket matches, they had a men's mile or maybe a women's mile as well. And once they actually did a 4x4, and they just set up cones around the perimeter, and it's a perfect oval, so it was the right shape. Might have only been 3 laps because it's like 533 meters or whatever to the perimeter. And it was awesome. Like, you got 30,000 people screaming at you, and it was New Zealand versus Australia on the running race as well.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Except it's on grass, and it's not like packed hard grass like they used to run at in the 60s. It was like soft manicured grass. So you just
it's almost a cross country mile.
There's no give back. We ran like a 4:10.
Right on.
That's
well,
super cool.
Yeah, I would love to see that. I think that'd be super cool. Okay. We love to go deep on the final question. And part of that involves lots of research on my part of watching old YouTube video interviews. My favorite one that I found is of you talking about your experience at the 2013 Speed Golf Championships. Little known fact, Nick Willis has broken 80 in under 45 minutes. I played collegiate golf. That is an astonishing performance. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your experience doing that and like what draws you to that kind of bizarre event.
The beauty and the beast or bitch, whatever you want to use, of speed golf, of golf in general, is that when you're on, you're on. But in regular golf, you get, if you're off, you've got time to sort of correct any things that are going wrong. You can change your grip or adjust your stance or all that sort of stuff. In speed golf, there's no time for any adjustments. But when you're on, there's no opportunity for your head to get in the way and to screw it up.
Yeah.
So when you're having a good day, it stays a good day the whole time. And so it's over so quickly, there's no chance for it to. So basically, when I've had my really good rounds, I'm hitting a 6 iron when I'd normally be hitting an 8 iron, and I'm only doing a 70% sort of punch shot.
Yeah.
But you just get in the zone and you run everything up onto the green, or you hit at the front of the green, and just everything goes dead straight. You don't have any spin on the ball. It's just perfect. But when you're off, it's terrible. There's no chance to correct it.
I remember
it gets ugly.
My high school team, we would play speed golf. And the first time I ever shot even par for 9 holes was in something like 35 minutes. And I was like, whoa, this is all of a sudden makes it more of like a fast paced sport. And I was still carrying my bag. So like clubs are bouncing around and everything. But I feel like if golf could be played quickly, I think people would have a much better time with it. And collegiate rounds would go for like 6 hours and you would just be like ready to die by the end of them. And you'd be playing horribly. So it would just be death by paper cuts slowly.
Speed golf was an awesome, fun experience for me, and I focused on it for about 3 years until my second son was born. I haven't, but I've only played like 2 or 3 rounds of golf in the last 2 years, and I think speed golf may have ruined my enjoyment of regular golf now.
Because regular golf is so much slower.
And I've lost my concentration ability. Like I'm not interested in playing for 4 or 5 hours. Like I stopped caring after like 9 holes. And so, yeah, now I'll only play 9 holes ever if my friends ask me to go out and play. Maybe it's just my stage of life because I've got 2 young kids right now and I'd rather be going out to the skate park with them or something like that, but we'll have to wait and see.
All right, final question. More intense nerves. You're par for 79 on the last hole or starting line of Diamond League 1500 meters? I personally will crumble if it's par for 79.
No, it was the first tee shot. I was the very first guy off the tee box at the World Speed Golf Champs that was on television. And like everyone gathered around and like, I have no idea where it's gonna go. Like it's so hard to like do your normal swing with all of those people on the tee box. And I wasn't a very experienced like tournament golfer. I've only played in like 3 junior tournaments when I was a kid, sort of thing. And I was always like somewhere in the middle of the round when no one was watching. To be the first person off the tee, that was terrifying.
I think the time I've had the worst nerves in my entire life was I played well one summer and I tried to qualify for the US Amateur and they introduce every player. And it was like the worst moment of my life. They were like, now on the tee from Swampscott. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. Don't say my name before I do this. And then everyone's watching. And I was like, I just absolutely rope hooked one. Got lucky off the tree, but that was like the most sports nerves I've ever felt.
That bounced back onto the fairway though.
You got to call lucky as soon as it starts to go out of bounds. You're like, lucky, 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 bang. I was like, nice.
So yeah, running, I'm never that nervous when I know I've done the right preparation. If the preparation's good, like sure, I'm nervous in a good way, but it's all like positive energy. It's when I've sort of slacked off a little bit and our first race of the season and you haven't had anything to really prove that you're ready. There's an unknown factor. That's when sort of matches when I'd used to show up to exams without having prepared in college, you know.
Yeah, that first race is always
you're not nervous. You're confident.
Love that. Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us. This was an awesome conversation.
Hey, thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Hey, team. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. 3 things really stick out to me about Nick and his career. Those are community, courage, and patience. His success is the result of a team of people, family, coaches, training partners who work together to create an environment of trust where he can consistently thrive. Nick is bold and willing to push back on systems he doesn't believe will bring him success. And perhaps most importantly, he's patient. The return to running plan he uses to come back when he's injured is incredibly conservative, especially for a 349 miler. That patience is key when you want to prevent problems from getting worse and nagging issues from compounding. Success for you probably doesn't look like 19 years, sub 4 minutes in the mile. I know it doesn't look like that for me, but whatever you're looking for from running, community, courage, and patience will go a long way. Run well, tell your friends about the show, and we'll see you on the next one. Same time, same place.